For the longest time, I used to have the utmost respect for China and its culture, but I am getting really sick and tired of them trying to throw their weight around and impose on my country. For the longest time, and this is well known among many people, for the longest time that used to be reserved specifically for media that is broadcast in China, specifically films, and not even just that, but also films that could potentially be critical of China and the United States. As many of us know, Hollywood bends over backwards to try to appease China by regulating its movies so that it will pass the censorship boards in China so that it can get into Chinese movie theaters. And this only happens for, I believe it's less than half a dozen movies, but it's lucrative enough that the Hollywood studios will actually bend over backwards for the Chinese. And not only that, as I just said, it's not affecting films that are just released in China, but as well as films that are released in the United States. One example of this, it's not even a recent one, this is well over 20 years ago. Michael Eisner was producing a film at Disney called, I believe it was Kundun. I don't know if I have that pronunciation correct, but it was a film regarding Tibet, and it was critical of the Chinese government. And even back then, this is, I believe, back in the 90s, even back then, the Chinese government was still pressuring Disney, and it's only gotten much worse since then. As many of you know, maybe not know, but a recent development that has occurred, and maybe some of you know, is that a general manager of a United States basketball team, NBA basketball team, tweeted his support for the protesters in China, and apparently was pressured by the NBA to delete the tweet. It has now been deleted, and the NBA has responded. This coming from CNBC. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver wants to meet with China officials to discuss context of Hong Kong protest tweet. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said he hopes to meet with Chinese officials this week when he travels to Shanghai for Thursday night's game between the Los Angeles Lakers and Brooklyn Nets, after a tweet from the league's executives ignited an international firestorm. Here's something that's a little disturbing to me. Why is the NBA even hosting games in China? It's the NBA, the National Basketball Association. Shouldn't they be playing games in, the nation for that the N stands for, as in the United States? Why on earth are we opening up venues in China? If this was, these were basketball players for the Olympics and the Olympics were being held in China, I understand. But why on earth is the NBA hosting games in... A lot of people are using the phrase fascistic for China. Tucker Carlson is often calling them fascist, and I kind of understand why. There seems to be a cult of personality with Xi Jinping, the president of China, and there's a lot of state socialism. So it probably is closer to fascism than it is to Marxist communism, but they still describe themselves as Marxist, so I'm going to still call them communist. But that's beside the point. Why on earth is the NBA hosting games in the communist country of China? It is completely beyond the pale for us to be doing this. The article continues. Chinese state-run television network CCTV said it was suspending the current broadcast arrangements for the NBA's preseason games in China, including this week's game, after general manager of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, okay, so that's the general manager, Daryl Morey, tweeted support Sunday for the anti-government protests in Hong Kong. The fallout has escalated from there as other Chinese companies began severing ties to the National Basketball Association. And you know what? Chinese interference in American, not even, I will say it, in American culture has been getting so severe that I think it's time that probably I think it's time that American companies should start severing ties with China. I know they won't, but I believe that they should start severing ties with them after all of the horrific things that they're doing, that the Chinese government is doing in Hong Kong. Is not even just Hong Kong, but in northwestern China, I was going to say internment, I guess it is internment, but forcing all of the Muslims in northwestern China into essentially re-education camps. And it's in the millions in northwestern China, forcing them into re-education camps. And these American companies have the gall to do business with China and then in turn come back to the United States, like companies like Gillette lecture us about our own morality here in the United States, is just absolutely appalling. Article continues. Silver called CCTV's decision, quote unquote, unfortunate and apologized for offending the league's Chinese fans. He stood by Maury's right to express his opinions, saying the league would, quote unquote, protect its employees' freedom of speech. Unfortunate. Unfortunate, Mr. Silver. You think that his remarks were unfortunate. No, what is unfortunate is the way that you're handling this by calling them unfortunate. And you know what? You shouldn't even apologize to them. If their sensibilities are that paper thin, if their sensibilities are honestly that paper thin, they don't deserve an apology. Sorry, I'm just a little upset by this news. Article continues. If that's the consequence of, this is a quotation, if that's the consequences of us adhering to our values, we still feel it's critically important we adhere to those values, Silver said. Speaking at a news conference Tuesday in Tokyo before a presentation game between the Rockets and NBA champion Toronto Raptors. Important that we adhere to those values. Well, I don't think there's any direct proof, but I think there is, I think that we can assume that there was a great deal of pressure put on, what was his name again? Daryl Morey. I think there was a great deal of pressure put on Daryl Morey to delete that tweet. So is that also you adhering to your values, Mr. Silver? I would assume so. The article continues. He said he hopes to meet with Chinese officials later this month to, quote, discuss where we stand and again put those remarks from Daryl Morey and my remarks in an appropriate context of many decades-long relationship and see if we can find mutual respect for each other's political systems and beliefs, unquote. So you're going to be going to China to kowtow to the Chinese censors is what it really sounds like to me. And they're going to probably put the pressure on you, Mr. Silver, and make sure that this never happens again. Again, I'm going to be just probably repeating myself many times, but any American company that is doing business with a regime like the communist regime in China has absolutely no moral high ground to lecture other Americans on what they say and do. Unless those other Americans are adhering to an ideology that is, something of akin to the Third Reich or something like that, unless they're following something that is really that extreme, these people have no right to lecture other Americans as far as their morals are concerned, because they are supporting a regime that is putting millions of people into actual re-education camps. Many people say Trump is putting, people like AOC are saying that Trump is putting immigrants into concentration camps, which of course he's not. He's putting them into detention centers so that they can then be evaluated on their refugee status or they are deported. That's how it works. You don't just release them into the general public. But the Chinese are going into northwest China, rounding up their own citizenry and putting them into re-education camps because of their religion. And these companies have the gall to side with them and lecture us Americans, about toxic masculinity or something like that. Again, coming to the case of Gillette. And even the NBA. The NBA was all up in arms about, this was years ago now, but about, I can't remember which state it was in. It was an eastern state, but it was about, genderless, I think it was about transgenders using whichever bathroom, that whole debate. That's what they were up in arms about. Which, that is an entire discussion unto itself, whether you agree or disagree with that. But this company has no moral authority over anyone if they are actually siding with the communist government of China.